Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, February 27th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about growing pest-free squash, broadforking versus tilling, and value adding like you've never seen it before. Maybe. So let's do it. All right. Happy Thursday, everyone. Yesterday, I was kind of forced to take it easy after the day before when I said I kind of maybe overdid it a little bit. I've grown increasingly susceptible to dehydration over the years, and I feel like I was going through a little bit of that yesterday. It's a weird sensation, but one I've gotten good at identifying and also relatively good at achieving. So although I was able to tinker a bit and finish some of my soccer field duties, nothing much to report on my end from yesterday. It was relatively laid back. And we're in that sort of season of restraint anyway, so I'm just enjoying the ride and trying not to overdo it on things physically and failing somewhat. Thus the little battle with dehydration. So apropos of nothing, really, something that has been on my mind this week is the idea of value adding. This is especially true after the episode on Tuesday when I talked about how much money a small market garden business can hope to earn. Also, for many, many years, it felt like extension agents and those sorts of people really wanted to push this idea of value adding. And I think now I kind of understand why. If they want people to keep doing this business, and they do, they need to help them earn a reasonable living from it. And value adding is theoretically one way in which we can do that, a misunderstood and perhaps unappreciated way, I think, even by me, but maybe also by some of the people who want us to do value adding. For starters, I have long thought of value adding in the most basic of terms. Like you take something you already produce, modify it somehow, and then sell that for more money than like the raw ingredient. So in the case of farming, perhaps you grow peppers. You take them to a commercial kitchen and process them into hot sauce, following your local laws, obviously, and then sell that hot sauce at your market booth. And to be sure, that is indeed value adding, a delicious type, in my opinion. But for me, I had always just thought, like that was a lot of extra work, especially for kind of a small gain. It's almost like starting another business where you would have to purchase these other ingredients like sugar and vinegar or whatever else that you need to make it pop and manage those. Plus find, build, and use a commercial kitchen, plus manage labels, bottles, etc., inventory, all the things. I mean, I love hot sauce, but I'm not sure I like it enough to start a hot sauce business personally. Anyway, that is how I had long thought of value adding, but that is not the only way to value add. So let's talk about a few other ways that are not necessarily a product that can add value to what you already do without a commercial kitchen. For one, your brand has value and it can add value to your products. Like think of podcasts. If a show you like, I don't know, This American Life or Radiolab or whoever, say, hey, we're starting this new series, you should check it out. They have added value to that product by having taken care of their brand so that you're willing to go check out the new product that they have because you trust the brand. Think about, I don't know, like how Patagonia, for example, versus like Joe Bob's Clothing Co. Could make the exact same jacket, but Patagonia can charge more because the brand trust. You, the consumer, know it is more than likely going to be worth the amount of money that they're charging. Plus, they've added other values, like a service where you can send in damaged clothes to get it repaired, or they're using regenerative farmers to produce the materials. Oh, and Patagonia has sponsored us in the past, but are not sponsoring this. Just FYI, for transparency's sake, just figured it was a more appropriate example than, say, Nike, I don't know. For a market farm, your job is constantly to stand out against competition. So building that brand trust where people know they are going to get good product is critical. I also used to tell folks that would come to the market if they didn't like something, especially if they were kind of on the fence about trying, I don't know, fennel or something, to just come back and get something else next week. No problem. I won't even, no questions asked. Just come, tell me how you felt about it, grab something else. No one ever really took advantage of that to my memory, but I think they appreciated the offer. It made our brand stand out. Also, services and subscriptions. We sold a market card purchased through Square where effectively cardholders could order online and skip the line at market if they wanted to. And they could just also swoop in and pick up the veggies they wanted and tell us, hey, take $5 or $10 or whatever off my card. And we do that without them having to wait in line or wait for the card reader to work, which it didn't always. That's how it goes. The value for us was the upfront money we would get before the season got going, sort of like a CSA does without having to do the CSA thing. The value for them was the convenience, or maybe it's not a card at all, but a membership where members pay an upfront fee and can skip the line somehow or get additional perks like pre-ordering highly desired items like summer lettuce or whatever it is. I remember interviewing Felix Hofmann of Solavi Weinheim in Germany like several years ago, and their farm just had members who they had like a CSA, but they also had members who would just support them and got a very small amount of perks, not dissimilar to a Patreon supporter. And I'll link that show in the show notes. It was actually a really good one. It's a very old one, but it's a very good one. The blue check mark on Instagram or whatever is a good example of this type of value add too. You can pay more to have your post be more visible and your name have that blue check mark to it. With the market cards in our farm, others would see those customers, skipping the line and inquire about the cards. Like it kind of sold itself. We also, for a long time, when we were doing a regular CSA, would offer home delivery in a certain area for $5 or $10 per week. The service area was pretty small and we could bust out 20 or 30 deliveries in a couple to a few hours. That was a value add for us that didn't add a lot to what we were already doing. No matter how you drop off, it's going to require your time. It's awesome when you can get paid for it. So it added another easy kind of couple $100 to our week for our business. Doing a survey can be a great value add too. How? Well, it helps you to know what your customers do and don't want, what they do and don't value. It may seem counterintuitive, but maybe adding value sometimes is simply producing less of what the customers don't want and more of what they do. Managing your books can also give you some indication of what your customers do and don't want, right? Just managing your numbers better can be a tremendous value add to your farm. Like you may be able to find hundreds, if not thousands of dollars that are just getting wasted on subscriptions or on stuff you don't actually need. That's a huge value add. Has any farmer listening or watching ever offered a frequent flyer reward, like a card that you punch every time they buy X amount of produce from your farm stand, like a coffee shop does, for instance? That could be a value add to get customers coming back, creating that loyalty element, improving the brand. Maybe they buy X amount and get a free unit or something or whatever makes sense for you. I'm not a huge fan of the tip jar at markets, but I've seen that as well, or just a donation jar for maybe like a specific project. Now that I'm talking about this, I'm kind of realizing just how much potential there is with creative ways to add value. So maybe I need to do more on this in the future. You all tell me, what are some non-hot saucy ways you have found to add value to your business, farming or non? Services, raffles, or other cool ideas. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk squash, shall we? BRB. See how it goes. It's rock and roll, but whatever you need, it's all okay with me. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by GrowSmart. Curious if your soil will be ready for planting this spring? GrowSmart can help you find out with their at-home soil tests. They'll ship it right to your door. Just send it back with your prepaid shipping and you'll have your lab results in just 2 business days. Their reports are simple with tailored seasonal recommendations for fertilizers and amendments. Order now at growsmart.com and use the code DAILY for 10% off. That's DAILY. Begin your soil prep now for a great spring with GrowSmart. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the question come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Casista DVM, who asks, quote, how long after transplanting do you keep your winter squash under netting to prevent borers? Until the female flowers show up? End quote. Okay, great question. So I'm just going to turn this into a segment on our squash growing strategy in general because it all kind of deals with pest management. Though I should say that I have less trouble with winter squash and pests than I do with summer squash and pests, the vine borer, squash bugs, any of it. But the strategy is more or less the same, in fact, for all of those pests. All right, so everything starts with good soil, obviously, and especially for squash. They love fertility, like a lot. I know I've said this before, but there's a reason the best pest-free squash you will ever grow is in your compost pile. Squash loves compost. So anyway, bed preparation and making sure there's a good high-quality compost involved is the first place to start with pest protection when it comes to summer and winter squash alike. Next, we start almost all of our squash in wind strips or soil balls or whatever makes sense for keeping the roots from touching for you. The touching of the root is not the problem. The problem is the disturbing of cucurbit roots when you go to plant them after they have intertwined a bit. They don't like that disturbance. If you ever see leaves curl and die at the tips after you transplant them, that's generally why. It's too much root disturbance. So be careful to ensure they get off on the right foot by being gentle with the transplants. And then when you do transplant them, make sure they are going into nice, moist soil. I always put a wet blob of nice compost at the bottom of the transplant hole just to give them a healthy jump start. Just make sure it's good finished compost. Otherwise, it could have the opposite effect of giving them a good jump start, like giving them a good death probably. You could also just start them from seed planted directly into a nice blob of compost in the garden, as opposed to seedling trays, as long as the bed is free of weeds, right? Because if you germinate them in the tunnel, then you skip that whole weed germination part. If you germinate them in the ground, then the weeds and squash are going to germinate roughly at the same time. And then you will obviously have to carefully cultivate around them once they do come up. Then immediately when I transplant them, I cover the bed with insect netting. This isn't always necessary, to be sure, but better safe than sorry, in my opinion. Obviously, if you were going to irrigate from below, like with drip tape. Wet leaves bring fungal diseases, so overhead watering is not generally ideal, though 1 or 2 good overhead waterings a week won't hurt them terribly. Just make sure the water distribution is even, i.e. run the irrigation long enough to saturate the whole bed below the squash. Few crops can show poor distribution of water, quite like squash, with wonky fruit and lopsided plants. So if you see that, it's probably a water thing. Then to finally get to your question, yes, indeed, I take the cover off when I see the first female flowers, or first flowers in general, really, but you can wait until you identify the females. That's fine, doesn't matter. One note here is that not all insect netting is created equally. The lightest row covers can trap a lot of heat, so I prefer to use specially made insect netting. I've been using Protect Net from Johnny's for years. We bought a bunch of it not that long ago, but many growers that I know are starting to suggest Exclude Net instead, which I have not tried. I still have a ton of Protect Net, so I haven't needed to buy new insect netting. But anyway, the Exclude Net is supposedly more robust and will last you longer. I will post a link for that in the show notes. You can try it yourself. Now, in the early spring, of course, or in colder climates, perhaps the heat trapped from the lighter row covers is a boon. Here in Kentucky, it's more of a death trap than a boon after April, just because it gets too hot and humid. In the early spring, it's great. As soon as you get into that heat, not so good. So yeah, if you've done everything right and given them a favorable place to grow, they should be ready to outrun pests and rock and roll into the fruiting stage once you remove that insect netting. I hope that is helpful, and hopefully everyone can let us know how and if this helps with your squash production this season. Otherwise, it's a quick break time, and then is Broadfork tilling. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. Okay, so this idea of broadforking as tillage comes up sometimes, and honestly, it's a statement I've been addressing for like nearly 6 years now since no-till growers started, and will likely be addressing for the rest of time, which is fine. I have no problem with that. There are a few of those things like phosphorus and compost applications, for instance, that people who are new to our work have questions about, and that's great. I don't mind answering the same questions or concerns again and again, and don't hesitate to bring them up, because especially with something like phosphorus, for instance, new information comes to light periodically, or it used to when there was funding for research, but that's for a different day. That all helps us to refine how we should and how we should use compost, how we should think about phosphorus, how we should think about applications and those sorts of things. So in the spirit of that, let's talk about how to think about broadforking in relation to no-till agriculture. So the broadfork, or even just the garden fork, is about what it sounds like. A large fork with tines that stick into the soil and is used to pop the soil up a little bit, break up compaction, and inject a little air. That sort of stuff. Just pretty simple. Basically, you plunge the fork into the soil, pull back lightly, preferably getting some of the compost to fall in there as you pull back, then yank the fork out of the soil, go back a foot or so, and repeat all the way down the bed. Now, you could use a broadfork to really scramble the soil layers if you wanted to. I mean, it would completely wear you out, but you could technically do that, which would be a decent amount of disturbance. But obviously, even in that scenario, you couldn't really crush a ton of soil aggregates and release a ton of soil organic matter like one does with a tiller, which we talked about in that one episode, and I will link in the show notes. How we use a broadfork on our farm is in the beginning of a bed's life. We will use the broadfork twice in the first season and maybe once in the second season if need be. Then after that, it's just as needed, which if you're following the other principles of soil health, cover crops, all those things, usage declines dramatically after that second season, even in dense wet clay like we have here. In my opinion, what I love about the broadfork is that it speeds up the decompaction process and ultimately will, or at least should, render itself obsolete over a few uses. Then the only time we will use it is on carrot beds, and not even every carrot bed. Some of our beds are pretty loose at this point after 4 seasons on this new property, so it's not necessary. Other beds are still a work in progress from years of compaction from, in our case, giant horses in a horse stable right where our high tunnel is now. We sometimes get too caught up in these dogmas about tillage or no tillage or disturbance versus no disturbance and forget to ask the soil what it needs. We forget that the majority of the plants we are trying to grow are recovery species and can handle a light amount of disturbance, especially at the surface level. Decompacting the deep soil horizons, as one does with a broadfork, will lead to better photosynthesis, better production, healthier soil, and ultimately the end of needing to broadfork. Like I said, it makes itself obsolete. Maybe it's a broadfork you use, or maybe it's a subsoiler on a larger farm, or a smaller fork on a smaller farm. Or maybe it's breaking compaction apart entirely to start a new garden with a plow and some nice compost, and then never having to do that ever again. Maybe never even needing the broadfork. In sandy or looser soils, these efforts may also be a total waste of time. Every context is different. Do you rip apart some fungal hyphae when you broadfork? Sure, maybe. But do you also loosen the soil around them so they can more easily dig around for nutrients and build soil organic matter? Yeah, which is the point. In the same way that we all need to not think of humans as inherently bad creatures whose interactions with nature and soil are always negative, the same thing goes with disturbance. The soil is in a constant state of disturbance. It's slow and methodical, with roots and worms and gophers and microbes all slowly but aggressively killing one another. I always say that if you could take a cross-section of a healthy no-till garden and filmed a time-lapse, it would not look static. It would look like someone was just churning the soil. It's beneficial biological disturbance, and there is no reason humans can't engage in that same thing. And of course, on some soils, maybe that broadforking disturbance is not necessary. Only your soil and your context can tell you that. So anyway, tillage can really do massive long-term harm to a garden, especially when done wrong at the wrong times. But few things are worse for a garden than dogma. Dype and Palmer said that. It's on the back of their hot sauce label. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. But before we go, I want to give one last shout out to the good folks over at Rimmel Greenhouses for making this show possible. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Big thanks to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers. Also, huge shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you're hearing. Who doesn't love a little extra music? Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of February, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Redbeard and Kate Starling. A name like Redbeard and Starling, you'd think this story would be about like pirates, but you'd be wrong. This one is actually about a couple of soil ecologists who get an interesting soil sample from, let's say, Missouri, and discover a small microbial fauna no one had ever seen. It was like a mix between like a tardigrade and a deer. Yeah. And anyway, like the goofball that they are, Redbeard accidentally bumps into the lab's ray gun and multiplies the size of the tardigrade thing and everything else on that specific plate by thousands of times, and suddenly unleashes a swarm of gigantic microbes. Anyway, it's quite the adventure. Those scientists. All right. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Feedback Friday. So leave your feedback. Bye.